The following program is brought to you by Freedom of Speech, constitutionally reinforced, odor absorbent. It's the only amendment that keeps you feeling fresher, freer, and more feminine. Lemon-scented freedom of speech since 1787.
This pussy grabs back. The Cary Harrison Files. CaryHarrison.com.
That's beautiful, isn't it? Don't forget to sign up for our free newsletter at CaryHarrison.com. That's CaryHarrison.com. There you're going to get a transcript of the entire show, plus access to clips and stuff we simply cannot do or say on the radio. That's our free newsletter at CaryHarrison.com. Plus, also live streaming right now on YouTube. You can simply Google Cary Harrison YouTube and subscribe so we can stay connected when you show up at your destination, and switch over to the stream on your phone at the Cary Harrison YouTube channel, which you can also easily find at kpfk.net. That's kpfk.net. Well, you, me, all hapless observers of our great democratic experiment, we've seen some things, haven't we? Recently, we saw the Democrats during the State of the Union address holding up paper fans in silent protest. The resistance chose to sit on their flattened scrotums, seen but not heard, as it appears to still be the case even now. Yet a 77-year-old African-American Democratic congressman from Texas, Representative Al Green, erected himself and rapped his walking stick against the back of a chair in protest, literally stealing the spotlight, and worst, the TV camera shots from the president. Hundreds of brave and strong GOP members would soon applaud as the crippled black congressman was forcibly escorted from the chamber. It's withering to imagine the potential force of that cane, ruthlessly bludgeoning the back of a hapless chair and potentially being unleashed across that august parliamentary body. We witnessed hundreds of quaking politicians cowering against the horrifying threat of a septuagenarian lifting his support crutch. Finally, sweeping into the rescue with a banging gavel was testosterone-pumping Republican Speaker of the House, Mike Johnson. Mr. Johnson, best known for having his private sexual peccadillos personally monitored by his own son via a mobile app, spotted the obvious threat from the withered husk grappling a cane. Speaker Johnson knew that calling the sergeant of arms might be the only way to protect hundreds of politicians under siege. Quickly, order was restored, and Mr. Green has subsequently been censured by act of Congress for having a Zelensky-like lack of gratitude or a bad case of white meningitis. Likewise, we've recently seen a former NFL punter get tackled by the cops at a city council meeting for daring to object to an official MAGA acronym at one of Benjamin Franklin's vaunted American inventions, the public library. The same Chris Klewe, who spent years booting footballs into the stratosphere for the Minnesota Vikings, has now been booted from his job as a high school football coach. His crime? Daring to suggest that the public library shouldn't be a billboard for a political movement by the same folks dismantling the Department of Education. Ironically, without books and educated people to read them, there'd be no reason to have a public library to begin with. Well, he's written books often found in public libraries, designed games, and advocated for LGBTQ and human rights in general, with the same precision he once used to pin teams to their own 5-yard line. He is, in short, a problem for people who prefer their athletes apolitical, their libraries ideologically empty, and their city council meetings free of anything resembling a spine. Chris Klewe, welcome. Let's dive into it. Chris Klewe, I think we have you there.
Yep. How's it going? Thanks for having me on the show.
Welcome to the show. Civil disobedience is an American tradition, but so is punishing people for it. What's been the most ridiculous reaction to your protest so far?
Well, I mean, basically getting fired from my job. That kind of sucks because I don't know where they're going to find another former NFL player to coach freshman football. The paychecks aren't really that great. So, good luck with that one. But yeah, no, I mean, I knew it was a potential consequence. I had hoped the school and the district would be a little braver. But unfortunately, I think it highlights kind of the sweeping amounts of submission we're seeing from our public institutions in that they're bowing to Trump A lot of them are just sort of, keeling over and trying to play dead in the hopes that he doesn't do anything more. And that's not going to help them. Like, it's just going to encourage him to keep demanding more and more and more professors fired, more students deported from the country, more, courses banned from being taught. And frankly, it's pretty un-American.
Well, yeah, and a bully wins when the resistance stops resisting. Then he could just take more territory, kind of like football, I suppose. The other team can't defend itself properly. You move in, you take over, you win the game. It's kind of the same formula, isn't it?
Yeah, no, very much so. I mean, in football, the phrase would be "run it down their throats," right? Like, if they can't stop the run, you just keep running over them, and then eventually it crushes their will, and then they kind of just give up. And I think that's what we're seeing from this administration. I mean, I'm sure your audience is aware of the sweeping attacks on, our military chain of command, on our health and education systems, on our judicial efforts to try to maintain a sense of law and order. And yeah, I'm a history and poli sci major, so I've studied a lot of what went on during 1930s Germany, and it's really scary because history doesn't repeat itself, but it sure does rhyme, and this one's rhyming pretty close.
Chris Klewe, you speaking of 1930s Germany, and I love it too. It's a template for exactly what's unfolding today. None of this is original thinking, as you well know. You call the MAGA movement a modern virgin. Hardly that. I would say that hymen has been splattered into a million pieces here. But you called it a modern version of Nazism. What's your favorite response from the people who insist, well, that's an unfair analogy?
Yeah, so I've had a lot of people, especially local people, like they've come up and like they tell me, well, I voted for Trump and I believe in MAGA, but I'm not a Nazi. Like, I don't believe in the Nazis. And my response to them is always, there were a lot of good Germans who voted for Hitler and believed he had their best interests in mind. And I think there are a lot of good Americans who voted for Donald Trump, thinking that he had their best interests in mind. And the things that both of them share is that they are narcissists and they're egomaniacs. They only have their own interests in mind. And when you look at the playbook that Hitler went by, the very first thing he did, he went after the trans community. Very first thing Donald Trump did, went after the trans community. Next thing, Hitler started destabilizing the government so he could start accumulating power within himself. Donald Trump currently destabilizing the government to try to accumulate power in himself. Hitler wanted to wage wars against other countries to claim their resources and build back up the German base that had been kind of crushed by reparations from World War I. Donald Trump wants to declare war on Canada, make it the 51st state, wants to take Greenland for whatever reason is in his addled mind. Like it's, again, the parallels are not subtle.
It's interesting you bring up the transgender issue and how there are complete parallels. The famous Nazi book burnings in around 1938 happened in front of Dr. Magnus Hirschfeld's former academic campus, where the first ever transgender surgery was done in the 1920s in a regular hospital, backed by the state. So this wasn't some creepy basement thing. It was like the first time ever. And they chose that site to burn the books. All of that, once again, sparking people's sensitivities. Now we have a new bill in Texas proposing to make it a felony to identify with a gender different from your one assigned at birth. There's already a law in Florida where changing the gender on a driver's license is considered fraud, and transgender people could face criminal charges when seeking housing, employment, medical care. If you put it under fraud, which is such a wide sweeping phrase, anything could be fraudulent. For example, in New Orleans, under Napoleonic law, while you had freedom of assembly in the Constitution under the First Amendment, they came up with a law saying it was illegal to impersonate a turtle. And that's how they got people for standing around in the wrong place at the wrong time. Turtle impersonation, or fraudulently being turtle-like.
Yeah, and I mean, it really goes to show that like the playbook they're following is the same playbook, because I hear from a lot of people, hey, like why care about the trans community, right? Like it's a small community. There aren't proportionally a lot of trans people in the United States, and the thing is that if we don't care about the trans community, if we cut them loose to try to protect ourselves, this administration is not going to stop. The next target they have their sights set on is Oberfeld. And they've stated as much. They want to get rid of same-sex marriage. And then after they get rid of Oberfell, they're going to try to go after gay people even existing, right? Like that's why you see them wanting to overturn Section 230, which is an internet provision that prevents providers from being sued for content on their platforms. Now, the problem is the Republicans see LGBTQ content as pornography, and they see LGBTQ individuals and those that support them as pedophiles. And they've said so as much. They've said it nationally. I've seen it here locally. One of our own council members at a recent press conference talking about how the ACLU is suing our city for First Amendment violations, essentially whipped the crowd into a froth, and they started chanting pedophile for LGBTQ content that is currently in the library. Like I was literally there, like watching it. I'm like, this is a fascist rally. Like this is not what a city council is supposed to be doing. And so we really need people to understand, especially our elected officials who are kind of wavering on the fence right now. You cannot abandon the trans community, because if you do, it will not stop the problem, and you are sacrificing so many people who just want to be themselves. It is ethically wrong, it is morally wrong, and it is politically wrong.
I was talking to a Marine, former decorated Marine, by the way, who is transitioning now. It happens all the time. And he said, I don't want special rights. I don't want anything that anybody, I just don't want to be killed. Just leave me alone. That's the only thing I want. Just leave me alone. And that seems to be what people just want. Just leave me alone, which is the American way, the right to self-determination. But fascism is an entirely different instrument. And I think the cure that a lot of us think we're supposed to have is just legal cures in what's clearly a organized crime takeover. These are mafia moves we're seeing, and they don't respond the same way as if, Richard Nixon broke the law and he's going to be held accountable. This is something different, it seems to people.
Right. And I can actually speak to that, because back when I was speaking out for LGBTQ rights, when I was playing in the league, it felt I got a lot of the same attention. A lot of the same things were happening, but it felt like we were still operating within the bounds of the American political system. Right. There were two sides. Each side was going to present their points. People would vote on it, and then we'd abide by the outcome. Now it feels like one side is, are we going to be America? And then the other side is, are we going to be something else? And that's the really scary part, because as we've seen with MAGA, they don't believe in the Constitution. They don't believe in the American dream. You cannot wave an American flag and support a man who posts a picture of himself with a crown on his head. Like, those two things are fundamentally opposed to each other. So as a country, we have to figure out, are we going to be Americans, or are we going to be something else that's probably going to be way worse?
Well, the conundrum is that you and I see Americans through the prism of the founding fathers, and other people see being American as they are ordered and rewarded for fantasizing what it really means. So it's become two separate entities. And George Washington was offered to become a king at one point. That they figured that was the only way we were going to really get stuff done, is you just got to concentrate the power, go back to it, but at least he'll be a benevolent king. He said, no, that's the whole point. No. English being the official language under the founding fathers. No, we're never going to speak the one language the king speaks because he wishes it. Same with the one religion that the king happens to be head of the church, by coincidence only, of course. So we don't have any of these things now. By a signature in a White House that people believe is real, the way they believe a dollar has a value of a dollar, or whatever they believe it is, because they believe it. If they stopped believing a dollar had any value whatsoever, the entire economy would crash. So this is really just Kool-Aid that is being poured and drunk at a faster pace than we can point out what the ingredients are.
Yeah, and the other thing that we really have to address as a country is the rise of propaganda in the United States. You look at the right-wing propaganda sites, Fox News, OANN, Newsmax, Facebook to a lesser extent, YouTube, certain portions. Like it is a fire hose of disinformation and misinformation going straight into people's brains. And we have to figure out how to deal with that, because I've had conversations with people who believe things that are just factually untrue, and they won't admit that they are factually untrue. And I don't know how to solve a problem if we're not both operating in baseline reality. So we have to figure out how to get people back to baseline reality, where when you say, this is what the Constitution means, we don't have a king, they understand that this is what the Constitution means, we don't have a king.
Cary Harrison with you. This is the Cary Harrison Files, reminding you that you can get our free newsletter at caryharrison.com, where you're going to get a transcript of this show. You're going to get clips. You're going to get archives of all the other shows. It's for free and for fun at caryharrison.com. We're talking right now to Chris Klewe, author of the acclaimed political essay collection, Beautifully Unique Sparkle Ponies, author of the novel Otaku, contributor to the anthology Press Start to Play, and the lead designer of the tabletop card game Twilight of the Gods. He's also a staunch advocate for LGBTQ plus rights, as well as basic human rights in general. You can find him online on Blue Sky, which is the new alternative to Twitter X, at Chris Warcraft, at Chris Warcraft. And Chris, you've written video games, as I just mentioned. You've designed a card game, written a book, Beautifully Unique Sparkle Ponies, even created a series for Amazon Prime, which I happen to be aware of, and now I know it was you, and I did enjoy it. It seems that the world of literacy and ideas don't jibe with bigotry and small-mindedness.
Yeah, and that's one of the big reasons why I protested against including this MAGA plaque on our local library in Huntington Beach, is that a library is supposed to be an apolitical place filled with knowledge where anyone can come and read a book. You know, regardless of your political affiliation, you can walk into the library, check out the book you want to read, and know that the book is appropriate because it's been vetted by librarians who that is their job. They spend a lot of time and they have to go through a lot of education in order to get that job. And an educated populace is an informed populace. And I don't think it's a coincidence that you're seeing the right wing launch these attacks upon institutions of education, because they don't want an educated populace. They want people who believe whatever feels right, instead of actually studying and learning what the facts are and then making a decision based on logic instead of vibes. Like we can't run a country on vibes. It doesn't work that way.
I have to say, I am loving every second of this conversation. This is like the most highfalutin, complex, wonderful conversation, and it happens to be with an NFL player, which makes it triply more interesting and amazing to me. What's more concerning to you, Chris Klewe, how easy it is to get fired for protesting, or how many people are actually okay with it?
Yeah, so for me, it's neither of those two. It's the fact that none of our Democratic officials, with the exception of Al Green, who you covered earlier, are doing anything. Like that. That's the only reason I did this, is because I have been waiting for someone in the Democratic Party to be like, this is not okay. The time for words is past. Like, we need to start looking back to the time of action, right? Like the protests against the Vietnam War, the civil rights of the 1960s. The right for women to vote, the suffragette movement. Like that's the time we're in right now. And that time demands civil disobedience, because we have a government that doesn't listen to us. It does not care what's best for its community. And we have to find a way to get them to understand that what they're doing is wrong. It's harming the country, and it's un-American.
And how do we get, not that there is no easy answer, otherwise it would already have happened likely, but how do we get these elected representatives who sit and hold up fans during, everyone should have been Al Green. And had they been, we might have had a whole different turnout and an entirely stimulated populace, and a plebiscite and a body of Congress actually sparking to life. How do we put a little heat under their rear end and get them to rise off their fanny?
Start primarying every Democrat. We absolutely need to start primarying Democrats in those elections. Obviously, in the general, hopefully vote for the Democrat who would be the better candidate. But right now, the party is empirically ineffectual. Like they've had their chance. The same leadership has been in place since I was a kid, right? Like Nancy Pelosi has been in charge of the Democratic Party since I was like 8 years old. Like, they had their opportunity. What they've done hasn't worked and isn't working. We need the younger branch of the Democratic Party to take over and start speaking to the younger generation, because the older generation just isn't getting the job done. And it's a shame, because it really seems like when John Lewis passed away, the party forgot how to cause good trouble. And that's what we need right now. And frankly, I'm only seeing it from, Al Green and a couple younger Democratic officials, like AOC, Ilhan Omar. I think Maxwell Frost is another one. Like, those are the people we need leading the country, and those are the people we need other Democrats to stop fighting against. We need you to get behind them because they know what to do, and you need to start listening to them and following their lead.
Well, yes, I love the sound of this. I just, looking back in World War II history, the celerity with which they clobbered everything, dismantling the Department of Education for whatever ridiculous reasons. An act of Congress, by the way, building that. My ancestor, Abraham Lincoln, thought it was a good idea because after the end of the Civil War, you had all these uneducated Black people. They were slaves. They were physical property. They couldn't go to school. So making them educated, including the ignorant white Southerners of the day, would mean you could actually put together a country that would function. So as an act of Congress, you came up with the Department of Education. Here you have the White House, which is supposed to be a co-equal branch of government, the executive branch overtaking Congress and just erasing laws, acts, money that's already spent and been earmarked, and just deciding what you can do with it or not. All of this entirely unconstitutional. We have hundreds of cases in court, attorneys general at least fighting back. But I think what you're saying, Chris Klewe, and I agree with you entirely, is you and me and Timmy and Mildred and Jason and Jennifer, we got to show up because we can't leave it to the grownups who are half in the bag and, I don't know what they're doing, but they ain't screaming and yelling. And if we don't, there is no voice to be heard.
Right, exactly. And the other thing the Democrats should be pointing out right now, like screaming from the rooftops at every opportunity, is that the Republicans have abdicated their responsibility. The Congress exists to keep a check on the president. That's why we have co-equal branches of government. That's why Congress has the power of the purse. And right now, Congress is just rolled over and said, we want a king. We want a dictator. And that, again, is fundamentally un-American. So yes, I want us to primary Democrats because I want more action. I want people who understand the severity of the situation. But the ultimate blame for all of this lies on the Republican Party. They have enabled a tyrant. They are currently supporting a tyrant, and they need to be held accountable for doing so.
One final question. Here we are at primarying Democrats. Let's say you're 21. You've never really voted. You don't really know what that means. What does that mean for the average kid who can get involved?
Right. So a really easy way to get involved, show up to your local city council meetings, because that's where the people who are already involved are going to be. You'll make connections in your local community. Your local Democratic clubs are another good way. There's a lot of them at universities and colleges. There's a lot of them that are just kind of run on their own. There's a movement called Indivisible. Those are grassroots chapters that are being created in states across the country. That's another good way to organize, get in contact with your local community, because really it all starts at the local level. Like, you got to make those local connections. You got to find who in your community understands what's going on. And then you have to start reaching the people who may not understand why this is important and get them to realize why this is important. Because let's not forget, half the country didn't even vote in the last election. Like, there's no mandate when 50% of America doesn't even bother to show up to the ballot box. So we have to get people energized and ready to fight for their country. And we can't rely on the current leadership to do that. We have to start forming our own leadership. We have to start encouraging young people to really take the reins and take control of their future, because if they don't, we're just going to keep getting sold down the river and we're going to end up in a really bad spot.
Well, what a great place to end. Thank you so much for joining us today, Chris Klewe, author of the acclaimed political essay collection, Beautifully Unique Sparkle Ponies, author of the novel Otaku, contributor to the anthology Press Start to Play, lead designer of the tabletop card game Twilight of the Gods, not to mention a hell of an NFL player and supporter and advocate for basic human rights in general. You can find him online at Blue Sky at Chris Warcraft. Cary Harrison with you. This is the Cary Harrison Files.
Listen, well, it's still legal. The Cary Harrison Files. CaryHarrison.com.
Here's an important message from the U.S. Med Diabetes Solution Center. If you have diabetes, you know the pain of pricking your fingers. But now, by wearing a small device called a continuous glucose monitor, or CGM, you can reduce your pain right away. It's easy to use and helps you make more accurate diabetes treatment decisions. So call us right now to see if you qualify for a CGM at little or no cost. US Med. Better service. Better care.